And now, the Lowe Post.
Welcome to the Lowe Post podcast. It's after Labor Day, where we are rapidly careening, I say, toward an NBA season that feels a little bit wide open, considering that a 64-win team just won the NBA championship and brought everybody back. That's the Boston Celtics, of course. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum should be coming back with chips on their shoulder. Jaylen Brown got snubbed by the Team USA in the Olympics. Jason Tatum got benched. Rudy Gobert got benched. Why is it that somehow Kevin Pelton, despite the fact that they have an ascendant superstar in Anthony Edwards and beat the Denver Nuggets on the road in Game 7 of the second round of the playoffs last year, as big a challenge as there is, I just can't quite get all the way there. I got trust issues with the Minnesota Timberwolves. Boston also has Porzingis out to start the season, and no one famously has repeated since the Kevin Durant Warriors in 2018. That said, on the other end of the bracket, I would bet big money, if betting were something I would ever do or recommend, on Oklahoma City being the number one seed in the Western Conference. And yet, when you talk about championships, they are still so young. And I don't know if I'm ready for that. The Nuggets, they have this whole Jamal Murray thing. What happened to Jamal Murray? He stunk in the playoffs other than 2 gigantic shots against the Lakers. He stunk in the Olympics. He still doesn't have an extension. There are rumblings that the coaching staff in the front office, or at least the head coach of the front office, aren't exactly seeing eye to eye in Denver, to a degree even unusual for the NBA. The Mavs. Can the Mavs do this again, having remade their team? Klay Thompson's and Derrick Jones Jr. is out. There's a whole bunch of changes. There's even a little skepticism about the Knicks. I've heard a lot of people tell me in the last week, are the Knicks really going to be that much better? And I said to them, maybe not in win total or seeding, but in playoff equity, you're damn right they're going to be better. They're going to be more well-prepared to have a functional offense in the playoffs, although they do have this Julius Randle situation hanging over their head. The West is so murky, KP, it's almost enough to make you wonder, have we given up too fast on the old guard of the Western Conference? The Lakers, their top 2 guys just dominated the whole Olympics for Team USA. LeBron and AD, they have a lot of continuity. The Suns, their 2 guys played quite well, especially Kevin Durant toward the end of the Olympics. Devin Booker became a Steve Kerr favorite. They added Tyus Jones. They have some pretty decent depth. If we all counted out the Suns too fast, the Warriors just signed Steph Curry to a 1-year, $63 million extension. And damn right, you pay Steph Curry all the money. He is the franchise. He is the Chase Center. He is everything. He created everything there. And they have an interesting team. DeAnthony Melton, slow-mo, Buddy Hield, kind of replacing Klay. Kind of interesting. They're deep. They have this Kuminga thing. Kuminga's not signed an extension yet. It's September. Could get spicy. Philly. We talked a lot about Philly, and I'll say this, Kevin Pelton. Maybe the most consequential thing that happened in the summer, other than signings, I guess. Joel Embiid's fourth quarter against Serbia in the semifinals of the Olympics, when the U.S. was down big and then crawled back in. And Joel Embiid, who has had a checkered big game record, a checkered crunch time playoff record, checkered, not all bad, not all good, just a little checkered. And in this past playoffs for the Sixers, admittedly playing on one knee, admittedly putting up a 50 bomb in one of the games against the Knicks, just kind of didn't seem super comfortable with the ball in his hands late in crunch time, kind of hot potatoed it a few times. And it was like, oh, what's going on here? He seemed damn comfortable against Serbia, went right at Nikola Jokic, wanted the ball, played with a steal and a confidence that I don't think I've seen from him in the NBA almost ever in a moment that big. It felt like maybe the most important basketball moment of Joel Embiid's career, and something that could be transformational for the Sixers. The Bucks, if you asked 100 people, Kevin Pelton, and I've asked 25 probably in the last 2 days, the Bucks are either being wildly underrated, or this era of the Bucks is dead or close to dead. Many people, the majority, easily have chosen the close to dead option, which makes me feel nervous for Bucks fans. It's going to be a fun season, and we haven't even talked about all the guys who could be available if teams like Atlanta or Cleveland or Chicago even start worse than expected, although Chicago's not expected to start very well at all. It's going to be fun. Kevin Pelton, how are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah, in some ways, not a lot has happened since we last spoke. I think the last time I was on the podcast was in Las Vegas during NBA Summer League. And in other ways, obviously, with the Olympics, a lot has happened since then.
Did you agree with me on the Embiid? I was watching that game in the Balkans with Balkan people who thought...
I'm very curious what that was like.
Oh, they were it was going to happen. It was going to happen. They thought, the upset was going to happen. They were all mourning the next day. I randomly, in a story that I can't even, it's too convoluted to even tell the connection, I ran into Nemanja Bjelica's brother the next day randomly, and he was like, that three we had it off an offensive rebound with 2:35 left in the game. We had it. But I was watching that game, and I was looking at Joel Embiid's facial expressions, looking at his body language, looking at the results, and I was like, if I were Daryl Morey or Elton Brand or Nick Nurse, it's like, yeah, the Team USA thing was kind of rocky. He didn't play great. It's like, is he really going to start every game? For that moment alone, for that stretch from like 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter to 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter, that was like, I'm doing backflips if I'm one of those guys.
Yeah, you triggered an interesting thought because you mentioned the West's old guard, and there was so much discussion, I think, even going into the Olympics about this is an opportunity for Steph and LeBron and KD, who might not have another chance to play for an NBA title. This could be the last, like, really, really big stage of their NBA career. And I hadn't really thought about Joel Embiid, this being the biggest stage of, his professional career in the same way, because of the fact that I do still think he's got those opportunities ahead of him, given his age and the addition of Paul George to the Sixers. But those are not guarantees, and it was a really important moment. I think going back to the playoffs, I think the understated element of it is not only that he wasn't 100%, physically because of the injury. It was also just the way his conditioning was off, having gone from, not playing for 2.5 months or whatever it was, ramping up a little bit, always ramping up at the end of the regular season, and then being thrust out there for like 40 plus minutes of extremely intense basketball against one of the league's most physical teams. And, Isaiah Hartenstein defending him, you know, fatigue makes cowards of us all, and I think that's what happened to Embiid in the fourth quarter of those games. But as you talk about the ramping, he by the Serbia game he had ramped. There was no more ramping to be done. That was the game the USA needed him for. He was there. He came up huge in it.
And I'll tell you, I watched the gold medal game at a very crowded bar with fans from every country, most of them rooting against Team USA, other than a select pocket of Americans that was over in the corner. And I give France a ton of credit. Obviously, Yabusele is now a Sixer. We'll talk about him. Wemby was just up for all of it. Just like you can't even, the degree to which he's exceeded the hype on every stage possible is almost kind of ridiculous given how young he is and how relatively inexperienced he is on an NBA level. And I thought, I was texting with a bunch of people in the lead up to the game. I thought we were going to blow out France. I thought it was not even going to be a game. I just didn't think they were going to be able to keep up offensively. I thought the Serbia, you knew there'd be a game. You knew there'd be a nail biter game. You knew there'd be a gut check game. And it always seems to unfold the same way. Team USA falls behind. The other team's hot from three. You know the run's coming. And then it's just like this fury, this avalanche of like steal, dunk, steal three, steal, dunk. What just happened? In 35 seconds, Team USA scored 8 points. I thought they were going to blow out France. And then Curry saved us in the end, went bananas. The whole bar was just cackling with laughter. Fans of all the teams, all the countries that were cheering against Team USA were, by the third or fourth three of the last 2 minutes and 45 seconds, were just cackling with glee. And it felt like, well, thank you, Steph, because we got out of there before Wemby like leveled up another leap.
I was in San Francisco that weekend for the final, and it was fascinating. I don't think it was necessarily Warriors fans because I was in touristy, walking around downtown and thereabouts, but like pockets of people just like, hey, did you see what just happened? Or like someone coming out of a bar celebrating right after it. It was tremendous fun and like a moment that, like you, I didn't expect. The semifinals, my story is I was watching that and I accidentally knocked out the power to my cable box. And it took me entirely too long to figure out that I could have just streamed the game using my, mobile connection on my phone. But I missed like a crucial stretch of a minute during the fourth quarter, right after, Serbia had taken that huge lead going into the third quarter. That was the moment where I was like, no, it's not happening. It's too big a deficit now. It's insurmountable. And the fury was there, all right. That's always my favorite scenario. Like when the Warriors were in their dynastic prime, like when they were down 15 in the middle of the third quarter. It's just like
Always
either
the
there's
third
going to be
quarter. Always the
always,
third quarter.
yeah, because the third quarter was going to be where they were going to make their run. will this either this is going to be a tremendously fun comeback, or we're going to see an upset here. Like there was guaranteed a good, entertaining outcome.
By the way, just before we transition into the actual podcast, although this is relevant, Gobert, I mentioned Gobert getting benched, and there was some I don't know if it was confusion, but was he injured? Was he not injured? How injured was he? Um, was that the reason for the decline in minutes? I just got to give Rudy Gobert credit. When it goes bad, it just goes so bad to such a comical degree, like in every possible way, from the stuff with the phones when COVID was coming to like, it's not just a buzzer beater. It's Luka Doncic hitting a buzzer beater and then talking so much nasty trash right in your face where we could all read your lips, to like, he got benched, not in the NBA. He got benched for Team France in the Olympics. And I understand they have two centers and they need to play Wemby at center. And can you imagine if they had Embiid, how crazy that would have been? But it's never just a simple sort of bad thing. And I do have trust issues with Minnesota more than I should have, given what they accomplished in the playoffs, given that they have Anthony Edwards, who is ready for all of it. And that leads me to my first question, Kevin Pelton. My first assignment for you was, free agency happens. It's a blur. You take stock and like July 7th. Okay, who went where? Let me look at the rotate, blah, blah, blah. And then you kind of put it to bed, and then you come back to the teams. And the way I get ready for the season is I go team by team and I try to sketch out their rotation. What are their positions of strength? What's a potential stylistic weakness or position of weakness? And I've gone through all 30 teams now. And when I do that, there's always 3 or 4 teams that I'm like, oh, I don't feel as good about that team now that I've really dug in as I did in the afterglow of free agency. Or, maybe I kind of underestimated what that team did in the offseason. I feel a little better about them. And so I wanted you to pick a couple teams, positive or negative, that on September 4th, you feel better or worse than in a real way than you did on July 7th.
Yeah, I guess I interpreted it a different way. I was looking at it more in terms of like the late stage free agency moves, and that led to two of the teams that you talked about in the intro, the Milwaukee Bucks and Phoenix Suns, who both came away with incredible bargains at the minimum free agency, which is both of those teams had to offer because of the fact that they're second apron teams. And Milwaukee getting Gary Trent Jr. to fill that spot vacated by Malik Beasley, who had signed a slightly larger 1-year deal with the Pistons after playing for the minimum and starting, throughout the season at shooting guard for them. And then Phoenix in Tyus Jones, like they had already signed a minimum backup point guard in Monte Morris, and Jones is basically just like the better version of Monte Morris in terms of younger, a bit better as a shooter, more dynamic as a playmaker. And, Phoenix, you mentioned Booker had a terrific Olympics, I think still an underrated one because people are putting Anthony Davis ahead of him in the, USA basketball pecking order from the Olympics. And I think through the group stage games, that was definitely true. But in the medal rounds, it was Embiid playing a lot of minutes against Serbia. It was a lot of small ball against France to deal with their lineups. And Booker was the guy that Steve Kerr would not take off the court, along with Kevin Durant. Like 2 of the 4 guys who played the most minutes for USA in the Olympics were members of the Phoenix Suns. And I always had questions about the idea of them like devoting a lot of resources to a traditional point guard, given the challenges that is going to present in late games defensively. Like, can you keep Tyus Jones, Devin Booker, and Grayson Allen all out there? Probably not. I think you're going to need, whether it's Josh Okogie or Royce O'Neal or someone maybe they trade for midseason using Okogie's contract to be the defensive stopper alongside those units. But they didn't have to devote resources. They just took a minimum and, slightly added to their luxury tax to get this guy who is exactly the kind of caretaker point guard that they really needed given their turnover woes last season.
Yeah, let's start with the Suns then, because they were on my list too, as I feel slightly better about them than I did 2 months ago. Their starting 5 is going to be very likely Tyus Jones, the big 3 in Nurkic, which means Grayson Allen now becomes a bench player, and his minutes will be interesting to monitor because, and that does, I think, a little bit change the complexion of the Suns, both because they have a traditional point guard and how defenses will guard Phoenix, because you would see some teams put their point guards on Bradley Beal, put their smallest defenders on Bradley Beal, and try to hide a bigger player on Grayson Allen. You can't really do that anymore. The point guards are going to guard Tyus Jones, which means if you want to hunt mismatches, you're going to have to involve not Bradley Beal necessarily as often, but Tyus Jones. But the question becomes teams that have 2 big men or an older power forward, where is that guy going to hide? And there's really not going to be a safe hiding place for them. Some of them are going to have to guard Kevin Durant like Cat did and did decently, I thought, in Minnesota's just complete humiliation of Phoenix in the first round of the playoffs. But it does beef up their bench, which is now, as you said, Monte Morris, Grayson Allen. I have a Kogi, Royce O'Neal, Mason Plumlee rounding out the rotation. Obviously, they'll stagger guys. So one of the big three, if not two of the big three, will be on the floor at all times. Plumlee's a big upgrade over Drew Eubanks, who just kind of showed some flashes and didn't quite earn Frank Vogel's trust. Bol is still hanging around. They're optimistic that the rookies that they drafted can contribute. There's some decent quality depth here. It's a deeper team, a little bit more well-rounded a team. And I do think, and I don't know if you agree. I don't know have you done your win projections yet or no?
Not yet. I'm still tweaking the projections because last year was not a very good year for them at all.
Well, I do you agree that Oklahoma City is going to be the number one seed?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think they're going to, if not run away with the West in the regular season. I don't know if they're going to make the finals, but I think they're going to win the number one seed pretty comfortably. But I do think I went through all the teams, and fair or not, there are questions about some of the teams that have been toward the top of the West. This presumed top four of Oklahoma City, Denver, Minnesota, Dallas. I think you can sort of dent almost all of those teams other than Oklahoma City as a regular season wins team and as a playoff equity team. We've talked a lot about who Denver lost in free agency and Jamal Murray struggles and all of that. There is a little bit, void is too strong a word, but one of these teams in the next tier is going to have a better season than we expect and get further than we expect. And I think Phoenix is certainly a candidate to that. I like what they did. My question is just the same, when they have Jones, Beal, Booker, Durant on the floor at all times, are they going to have the right balance in their offense? And part of that is, I had one scout tell me, I was talking to a scout yesterday. I said, well, do you really want to just have Tyus Jones running the offense with those three guys on the floor? I know everyone thought they needed a point guard. You want to take the ball out of their hands. And he said, maybe in some half-court possessions, but I expect the Suns to try to run and get those other guys going in transition. I thought that was kind of interesting take. And of course, we didn't mention Mike Budenholzer, who is a great, great coach, certainly a great regular season coach, and has won a championship. I guess my skepticism is both the quote one ball problem and just making sure you maximize everybody and hunt the right matchups, which they did not do. Their offense just melted down into a morass of nothingness in the playoffs. And I don't know what the roadmap is here again to an above average defense. I realize they had technically an above average defense last year. I believe they were 13th, but they're just so small and so soft and so vulnerable on the glass that I like Royce O'Neal. He's undersized for a wing stopper and certainly for a small ball four. I like a Kogi, fine. It's just, that coaches are going to lose trust in him because he's not going to make shots. And so you mentioned he's a human trade exception, but I don't know. I feel better about this team. What is their roadmap to a good enough defense? Or is it just our offense is our good enough defense because we're going to score all the time?
I mean, I think it's similar to last year. I think, Frank Vogel got a lot out of this team defensively. The reason that he was fired after one season, fairly or not, was not about what they did defensively. It was entirely about the offense. And I think a lot of that was how high the turnover rate was. And that's where, you bring in the 2 point guards with the best assist to turnover ratios in NBA history. You hope that is going to help that, even if it, takes the ball out of the hands of guys that like to play with in isolations a lot. And look, that's something that Milwaukee did with Chris Middleton. Was kind of one of the interesting tension points when Bud came in there, was how much he liked to isolate and shoot in the mid range. And, he was able to not completely transform his game, but maybe evolve a little bit, more of those ISO shots became threes instead of twos, things like that. And that was part of the tweak that helped Milwaukee kind of unlock everything offensively, along with, adding Brook Lopez at the same time that they signed Bud. So, the Suns are not going to have as dramatic roster changes. It's going to be a purer test of, hey, can Mike Budenholzer just get more out of this same group than Frank Vogel was able to offensively?
What did you think of my general rundown of the landscape in the West? I just sort of riffed on Minnesota, Denver, Dallas. What of the old guard of Golden State, Lakers, Suns, whatever? I didn't mention the Kings, the Pelicans, who have a huge number of questions. Was there any team in there that you thought, it seems like we disagree about that team, or I'm higher or lower on them, or or just more broadly? I think I asked you this 2 months ago, but who would you pick to actually come out of the West? Is it just so you're just youth be damned? I'm going Thunder.
I think you've said that the consensus among people you ask is either they hem and haw or they immediately pick Oklahoma City. And I'm probably in the immediately pick the Thunder camp in terms of, look, they played Dallas very close. I think that series was tied in terms of total points across all 6 games. They didn't get an opportunity to play Minnesota and Denver, so we don't know what they would have looked like against them. But I don't come away from that playoffs feeling worse about them as playoff performers because of what happened to those other teams. And then they added Alex Caruso and Isaiah Hardenstein and got this additional year of experience for all their young talent. So even though I would take the field over Oklahoma City, I think if I'm taking one team, it's going to be the Thunder for sure.
I don't know yet. They're still so young. I mean, like they were very good in the playoffs last year. They did catch a break in the first round, getting the Pelicans without Zion and with Brandon Ingram just coming back from injury. A playoff series is so bad for Brandon Ingram that there's been like zero real trade buzz about him in the offseason, and it wiped away what was a pretty damn good playoff series performance in his first go round in the playoffs against the Suns. I would be tempted to default to Denver because they have the best player. And we're going to get into our most intriguing players quickly toward the end, but I didn't have Jamal Murray on this list because he's not like, I kind of know what Jamal Murray is when he's healthy, and just saying if he's healthy is not that interesting of a question. But he does loom as the biggest wild card maybe in the whole league right now, both because Denver has not signed him to an extension yet. That could happen at any moment. And I still do expect Denver to sign Jamal Murray to an extension, or I don't think they want to go into the season without one. Not a lot of people have asked the question of like, well, yeah, it's cool to be down on Jamal Murray. Like he was not great in the playoffs last year. He was like dismally bad for Canada. What is your replacement plan for Jamal Murray with Nikola Jokic in his absolute prime? That's a harder question to answer.
Yeah, and I don't think there is one. I think if you don't sign him to an extension, the logic would strictly be right now he's max or nothing, but the season might happen and his market might be different and we can get him for less.
That's the other scenario that I've talked about with people in the last couple of days is what if they just play it out and get to unrestricted free agency or whatever ends up happening and they can sign him for a better deal over more years than anyone else can offer. It's just always a risk, and you rarely see teams take that kind of risk with a player like Jokic. If I were confident that Jamal Murray would get back to 2 years ago, Jamal Murray, and stay healthy, I think I might default to Denver, but that's why I call him the wild card there. You talked about the Bucks too. I mentioned before, sort of flippantly, that I've asked this either or question to lots of people. Are we sleeping on the Bucks? And by that I don't mean like, oh, people have written off the Bucks. The Bucks are dead. It's just in the sort of excitement over what the Knicks did, what the Sixers did, and the Celtics' dominance of the East in the NBA all season. The Bucks are kind of like the fourth team that people are mentioning in the East, which has not been the case for most of Giannis Antetokounmpo's prime. They signed Gary Trent Jr. at the end of the offseason to round out their starting five. And there's a very easy intellectual case to make for a bounce back season for the Bucks. It's so obvious involving health, although Chris Middleton did just have 2 more surgeries, and chemistry and coaching stability. We don't really even have to go into it. And yet, almost unanimously, when I ask people around the league that poll question, are we sleeping on the Bucks and they're like true blue chip title contenders, or are the Bucks, this iteration of the Bucks, close to being dead? It's almost unanimous that people go with close to being dead, to the point that I find myself looking at my sheet of paper projecting their rotation, and Gary Trent Jr. shot this, and Taurean Prince was a nice signing at the minimum, and maybe Doc will actually trust one of the young guys and that guy will pop, and Bobby Portis is still good. And I find myself asking myself, like, am I just too slow to declare this team dead? I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to pick them to get out of the East, but I've been surprised at how low people I talk to are on them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends whether you treat last year. I mean, the fact that they haven't won a playoff series 2 years in a row surely factors into this.
And Giannis being hurt for both of them.
Right. And look, if your take is just, well, Giannis has to be healthy in the playoffs, like, Does that separate them from the Philadelphia 76ers? Are they going far in the playoffs if Joel Embiid isn't healthy? Like I don't know that I necessarily buy that you should be more bullish on the Sixers and the Bucks from a health standpoint. Paul George being a factor in that too. I suppose Tyrese Maxey is the single safest bet among the stars of either of those two teams. I I just have to believe that there is going to be better chemistry between Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo offensively in year two, with Doc Rivers there for a full training camp and his staff. I do think they're being slept on a little bit. I wouldn't. I think they belong in the same tier as the Sixers and the Knicks, which was a conversation recently on the Hoop Collective. I would put them there.
I would too. I would probably, if I were ranking the tier, I would put them third behind the Sixers and the Knicks, just because of the collective age of Dame and Brook Lopez and Chris Middleton, and particularly Middleton's injury history the last few years, and Giannis's too, honestly. I mean, they've been fluky injuries, short-term injuries, but at the wrong time, I guess. They're a hard team to know what to make of, but I thought that one of the last episodes I did was about Gary Trent Jr., centered on Gary Trent Jr. I thought that was a home run signing for them. All right, can I give you a team?
Go for
it. The aforementioned Philadelphia 76ers. I'm very high on the 76ers. I think the big three is a perfect central casting, lock in the puzzle pieces, big three. Point guardish player, wing, big, complementary players, two great defensive players, Paul George in the perfect role, all of it. It's and look, we all know, like, yes, health in the playoffs, Joel Embiid's health in the playoffs, he's got to be healthy, et cetera, et cetera. It's the depth around them that, as I worked out the rotation, was not quite as exciting as it was as they were sort of grabbing all of these bargain basement players, including just stealing Caleb Martin from the Heat. And it's not that the depth is bad. It's just that I'm interested to see how it works in practice. So my prediction for their starting five, and this could be wrong and this could change, is Maxey, PG, Embiid is obviously the three locked-in starters. I am penciling in Kelly Oubre and Caleb Martin as the fourth and fifth starters. I think there's a chance Kyle Lowry ends up in one of those spots depending on the matchups, but let's just say that that's the starting five. Then the bench is some combination of Kyle Lowry, okay, he's old, Eric Gordon. You struggle to remember like a single thing he did in Phoenix last year. Gershon Yabusele, fresh off dunking LeBron James into oblivion in the Olympics, and one of the all-time great highlights, and hit the entire bar going like, what just happened? And shooting well on threes in the EuroLeague overall on the shorter three. And Andre Drummond, who's just perfect, great backup center. Everybody loves Andre Drummond as a backup center. And then you have Reggie Jackson and another. So it trends kind of small. You have McCain, the rookie they just drafted. Ricky Council, the fourth is he the fourth? Am I right about that?
Yep.
Is certainly had some intriguing minutes down the stretch of last season. Kenyon Martin Jr., who's part trade exception given his salary, but I've always liked him as a player. So maybe it works itself out. And obviously, look, they're going to stagger minutes. One of Maxey and Embiid's going to be on the floor at all times. Two of the three could be on the floor at all times in real big games. And in fact, they have a history of when Embiid's resting, they got to throw everybody else in there that's any good. The depth trend's a little small, a little unknown, and a little old in a way that makes me not worried. I still think they're awesome, but makes me feel like there's definitely another move that's going to come during the season to round out the team.
Yeah, I think there has to be, unless Kenyon Martin Jr. really exceeds expectations. And, I was intrigued to see what he was going to be able to do with the Clippers last season. Never really got off the ground there because he was included in the Harden trade. And like, even when the Sixers were as injured as they were, didn't end up last season, which makes me skeptical that he is going to be part of this roster after the trade deadline in February. Yeah, I considered them. Yabusele is really interesting. The version of him that we saw in the Olympics, like, it was less about not playing Gobert and more about playing Yabusele and Wembanyama together, and the things that they were able to do with their floor spacing and the quickness that Yabusele has at his size, which is what made him a first-round pick by Danny Ainge back in the day with the Celtics. I did run his translations of those, international EuroLeague stats, and they came out about replacement level, like, a minimum guy. So, the bargain that I think people are kind of thinking of him as, we'll see if that proves the case, if he can, exceed those. And like the biggest question mark about this team, I think, is do they have enough size at the power forward spot? And PG, compensates a little bit because he's enormous for a wing and, has sort of played that role in a lot of Clippers small ball lineups over the years. But, Caleb Martin's giving up size. If you're going to start him at the 4, Yabusele is physical, but not very tall necessarily for a power forward. Martin, same, kind of plays bigger than he is because of his leaping ability. So if is that player they're able to add midseason, could it be a 6'9" guy who can stretch the floor and defend fours? Like, if so, I feel a lot better about the Sixers going into the offseason. It turns out there's not that many of those guys, and they tend to be, pretty valuable when they do get traded. So that'll be a tall order.
Yabu may not be tall, but he has, let's call them, other dimensional advantages
he does
in his body type that are frankly astonishing to look upon when you see them at close range. I love the Sixers. I think they're going to be awesome. I just, look, the Celtics are the standard, and it's a very high standard to meet, despite the fact that, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum were not the apple of Team USA's eye when it really counted. We all know what that team is. We all know what they just did in the playoffs, albeit against as cake a walk as you're going to get to the finals. But this team has the upside to finally get to the conference finals in the post Iverson era and actually win the title. I think that big three is that good, but I just need to see the depth. Do you have another team, or do you want me to pick another one?
You pick another team. I didn't end up feeling particularly strongly about anyone else besides Phoenix and Milwaukee, I suppose.
I mean, yeah. This next one makes me a little bit sad because I'm still very excited about them. I'm less, and I realize I'm saying this about the team with the next truly great young player on earth. I'm a little less optimistic about the Spurs' ability to crash the playoff party than I was 2 months ago after they got all the good stuff in the DeMar DeRozan trade, including Harrison Barnes, a suitable starting power forward, and signed Chris Paul to play with Wemby and sort of direct the offense and throw lobs and do all the stuff that Jeremy Sohan could not do as point Sohan for the first half of last season, and just sort of a better point guard than Trey Jones. And the only reason I'm a little worried about it is, right now I would guess their starting 5 is Chris Paul, Devin Vassell. Love Devin Vassell. Could not be higher on Devin. I am like the president of the Devin Vassell is awesome, potentially awesome fan club. Sohan, I think, would be my choice to start in the 5th spot with Harrison Barnes and obviously Wemby starting at center. It's a nice lineup. I think it could be a good lineup. You could start Keldon Johnson in the Sohan spot. I just kind of want to surround Sohan with as much shooting as possible so he can be like handoff guy, screener guy, random cutter guy. And that makes my bench Trey Jones. Castle probably walks into bench minutes right away. Keldon Johnson. I'm not sure he's going to be psyched about that, but whatever. Zach Collins. And then either you stagger some minutes, or I don't know who's in that other spot. And because the depth beyond like the top 8 or 9, depending on your taste in the likes of Malachi Branham and Blake Wesley, is pretty unproven. And it just makes me worry, not necessarily because I have worries about that rotation I just outlined, winning between 37 and 42 games, whatever it is. You're just one injury away from like, who's playing 25 minutes a game for the Spurs? So as I went through their rotation, I thought, I was big on like, I think their over-under was 34.5 or 35.5. Like nail the, maybe even lower than that. Hit the over hard. They're going to push for a play-in spot, make the play-in, whatever. All still possible because this dude may just be that good right now already. And that's the hardest reason. That's the most difficult obstacle in being slightly pessimistic about them, is Wembanyama may just be 40 wins by himself in terms of just what he lifts the team to. But I worried for their depth. I mean, Chris Paul's old. He's going to get hurt. Vassell's had injury issues. Harrison Barnes is getting a little old. Then you got rookies and unproven guys. I don't know how you felt about this. I can't remember how you felt about the Spurs in the wake of free agency.
It's been pushed all the way up to 36 and a half now, their line at ESPN bet. So there's optimism out there about the Spurs. And
that's optimistic. That's optimistic.
Like 90% of it is Wemby, and I think probably 10% of it is, getting some vets in Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes. And, I think one of the things we saw last year with the Rockets, like they imported quality players in free agency without question in Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks, and then the vets that they sprinkled in the bench, the Jeff Greens and Jock Landales. But the biggest thing was kind of they stopped playing their young guys who weren't any good, the Ty Washington Juniors, and I can't even remember necessarily who was littering the Houston bench the previous couple of seasons when they were so bad. San Antonio, I think, when healthy, has an opportunity to do something similar in terms of just taking Blake Wesley and Malachi Branham out of the rotation is going to make you a better team this year. So I think a lot of it is like, what's the goal? Are we trying to win as many games as possible right now? Are we trying to, make the playoffs? And if so, you're going to see a lot of Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes. Or is it still a lot of minutes for Stephon Castle as a rookie, for those guys, for Sohan, who I think still falls into that category of the more minutes he plays, the better perhaps for your long-term development, but the worse for your chances of winning this season. The one guy, Julian Champagnie, erasure here, he was pretty good for them at the end of the season.
He's on my deep bench list. But yeah, he was good for them. He shot it well for them too.
Sort of in that same role that I think Harrison Barnes will more effectively play for them this season. But, I think he'll be plenty involved off the bench as well. And Keldon Johnson was a consideration for my most interesting players list, because I do think there's an element where, everyone talks about the way that the environment, last year held Wemby back in the first couple months of the season. They don't talk very much about, Keldon Johnson also could use some floor spacey around him, like he enjoyed early in his career when the Spurs had a number of veterans. And, his season sort of was the inverse of Trey Jones's. Trey Jones was coming off the bench when Johnson was starting earlier in the year. Johnson went to the bench. Jones became a starter. So he didn't get a lot of opportunity to play with a competent point guard. So just whether that's Trey Jones or Chris Paul this year, having the two of those guys, I think will help him a lot.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, what is the goal? On the one hand, the Spurs have so many draft assets from so many different places, including in the more immediate term, the Hawks, but they have all these swaps down the line from
don't forget the Bulls.
And the Bulls, still the Bulls, Minnesota and Dallas and Boston. I think they have a swap too from Derek White down the line. That would seem to say, well, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can pursue wins this year because you don't have to worry about tanking or draft equity because you have a bunch of draft equity. On the other hand, this is a pretty goddamn loaded draft, and your maybe last chance, if it's a chance at all, of a top 8 pick or whatever with Victor Wembanyama on the team. We've seen with LeBron and other sort of generational stars, and even one level below that, your team gets good fast. You don't get a lot of bites at the apple in the lottery. You got 2 last year. You traded 1 for a future draft asset from the Wolves that became Rob Dillingham in Minnesota, which really, when you outline the depth, that there's a present day cost to that trade that I think is even greater than I understood at the time. They could use another, even though you expect the 8th pick in the draft to be a net negative as a rookie, there's a place for that kind of player in this rotation that might be better than some of the players who are going to get minutes, particularly if they're an injury. But on the other hand, it's like, can they lose enough games to really get in the picture? I mean, with the flattened lottery odds, maybe you just say, hey, if we have to do what Utah's done the last couple of years, we have a greater chance to move up in the draft than we would have had 10 years ago or 8 years ago when the lottery odds were more weighted toward the worst teams. But there's going to be some bad teams chasing ping pong balls all season. And I frankly think that's one of the reasons why Brandon Ingram has proved harder to trade than maybe the Pelicans thought. Why Julius Randle, if the Knicks ever decide to actually move him, and there seems to be some stasis there. These teams there are not as many teams that have an appetite for a floor raiser like that in this particular season among the rebuilding teams or middling teams. That's why it's hard to find hard to find a home for those guys. By the way, just as an aside, we talked about Milwaukee. All of this stuff is just chit chat until the games start to get played. And then we get 20, 30 games in, and teams are either better than we thought or worse than we thought, better than they thought they'd be, worse than they thought they'd be. And we don't mention him anymore as a trade candidate. But if Milwaukee is indeed worse than they expect to be, and I'm not saying I think that, I'm saying a lot of people I've talked to think that, we'll see. Middleton is effectively an expiring contract who's getting older. Giannis is Giannis. If things don't go well in Milwaukee, why would the Heat not call again about Damian Lillard? Why would other teams that were interested not call again about Damian Lillard, depending on how he's playing? He's the one that would make the most sense. I'm just putting it out into the world, but I'm done talking about the Spurs. I have nothing more to say other than Wemby is going to get wind of this probably. I loved his comments after the Olympics. Like the whole world should be worried, because that's what it felt like watching the gold medal game. It felt like we gotta get in the getaway car and get out of here before this dude like figures out how to make more threes or whatever the next thing is.
Yeah, I mean, I think, San Antonio, I don't feel, yeah, I understand what you said. The other thing about the tanking teams is those are so concentrated in the Eastern Conference, whereas in the West, teams are generally trying to win. It's only, Portland and Utah that I think we can for sure pencil in behind San Antonio in the pecking order.
What did you think of the Markkanen extension, and just in terms of Utah's short and medium term planning?
I thought I was a little surprised the degree to which people expected him to kind of take more of a haircut on the extension than he did, even with the renegotiation aspect up to the max this year. I mean, people ask kind of what's the benefit. The benefit is you keep Lauri Markkanen, and I know by all accounts he wanted to be in Utah, and the fact that he signed this and it became a de facto no trade clause was a benefit of the deal. But still, like, how good are you going to feel about your chances of re-signing Markkanen as an unrestricted free agent next season if you're coming off of another season that you're probably going to be in the lottery?
I I think I was partially wrong in saying before the deal that it didn't pass the smell test to me that they would just re-sign Markkanen and do little else in the offseason, because are they really going to put themselves in position again to be picking 8th, 9th, 10th instead of really chasing a pick in one of these two drafts? And I know Danny Ainge, and I remember saying, I know Danny Ainge, I know he's going to want to be at the top of these drafts. And I think what I sort of underestimated is the potential of re-signing him, which they have now done, or extending him, and then still being pretty bad by playing the young guys and eventually offloading Clarkson, Sexton. I mean, this is a plan I was aware of. People told me about it, not Utah people, just people spitballing. And I got it cognitively. It just felt I was too impatient, I think. And I could see that unfolding, and I could see the Jazz thinking, yeah, hey, look, we might not be able to outtank Brooklyn. Certainly not going to outtank Washington, Portland, whatever. We could be the 5th or 6th worst team and sort of just take our shot at it under this revised lottery odds. And maybe we don't get the first pick. Maybe we get the second, third. Maybe we don't move up at all. But I could see that playing out. The subplot there is, how long is Markkanen willing to wait in his prime on a team that is sort of perpetually searching for the next set of young guys? And maybe Keontae George makes a big leap. Maybe Cody Williams comes out of the chute like gangbusters. Maybe Hendricks makes a big leap. Sensabaugh showed some flashes at the end of last year. They've got pieces already. So they are, though, and they obviously are loaded with trade assets.
Yeah, I think they're a team that, as we talk about that San Antonio, which way is the dial going to go? It's pretty clear that even with those veterans on the roster, the dial is going to go to, your point guard duo is going to be Keontae George and Isaiah Collier. That, Taylor Hendricks, who barely played in the first half of last season, is going to play a lot right away from day one. And that will kind of do to your record what it's going to do. And I do think people have been a little slow to internalize the effect of the lottery changes, like the discussion about how unlucky Detroit is to be picking 5th every year with the worst record. It's like, well, that's actually the most likely outcome. Like, yes, you have the best chances of being first, but your chances of being first relative to the team that enters the lottery are 8th are not that high. So, like, I think it's even in the words we use around the lottery. Like, Detroit didn't move down when they went from first entering the lottery to fifth. Fifth was the default. If you get a top 4 pick, even as the team with the best odds of doing it, you're still moving up.
I
And then
like
on
that. It's true. Um, it's in practice, it's true. Any parting thoughts on teams before we transition to our list of intriguing players?
this is maybe related. One team I'm feeling a little bit, I don't, I guess I'm feeling a little bit better about is a team that doesn't get talked about enough probably in the West mix. I don't think they came up earlier. The Memphis Grizzlies. And one of the things that happened, no, Andre, is actually, yeah, you're frustrated. You did mention that Scottie Pippen Jr. was awesome in summer league as part of the Grizzlies run in that. Like, if he's just a really good backup point guard in those minutes that were Derrick Rose at the start of last season, or now John Morant, some combination of Marcus Smart and Scottie Pippen Jr., like that's a pretty big upgrade for them. So yeah, I'm feeling a little more bullish on the Grizzlies,
I will
which
do
I
you
guess
one better.
should be
I
doing
feel
bearish.
like I feel like an insane person talking about the Memphis Grizzlies because I was reading, ESPN. Well, you guys, I guess there was some voting and there was a collective win total for each team, and
As a
the
panel,
Grizzlies
it
came out.
wasn't me just deciding it.
The Grizzlies came out with 44 wins, I think, and in the play-in race, and even some. I had a bunch of meetings yesterday in the city. The Grizzlies, there's some skepticism about the Grizzlies, and they're not meant. Like you start listing off the contenders in the West, and they don't come up. I'm like, I mean, look, I get it. John Morant has got to prove it. He's got to stay on the floor. Marcus Smart was injured all last year. We haven't seen how that all fits together. Gigi Jackson, who loomed as like maybe a bench wild card for them, and certainly a guy who can score and do some things off the bench, is going to miss, I think, several months with this broken foot. That is a potential blow. They just win games. The Grizzlies win lots of basketball games when they have John Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., and a viable supporting cast. And I think, despite the fact that they are going to, maybe likely to, probably will start a rookie at center this season after drafting Zach Edey and trying to get Donovan Clingan too at some points. I just think they're going to be really good. And I see 44 wins and I'm like, okay, it feels wildly low to me, but everyone I talk to is just kind of soured on the Grizzlies and their infrastructure and obviously their superstar who's had a couple of lost seasons here. Could not be higher on them. That doesn't mean I'm going to pick them to win the West, but I think they're a candidate for a top 3, a seeds 2 to 5. I expect Memphis to be in the race for any of those seeds.
Agreed. Yeah, we got some news, by the way, on Gigi Jack's second. As we're recording this podcast, the Grizzlies announced he'll be reevaluated in approximately 3 months. So we'll miss at least the first month and a half of the season with that injury. But, I don't know that you were necessarily penciling him into a huge role anyway. Vince Williams Jr. is another guy who played a lot as a, when they had that opportunity because of the injuries last year and proved himself to be an NBA rotation slots back into a bench role that's more appropriate for him. But I do have another comment on the Grizzlies coming later in this pod.
Oh, so. Okay. Clark's healthy. Aldama's good. Give me the Grizzlies stock. I'll take it. Okay. Every year in the preseason, I write a column, my 6 most intriguing players or 5 most intriguing players, depending on how industrious I'm feeling at the time of this season. And as a rule, I don't pick superstars, although I break that rule every once in a while. I had LaMelo Ball last year. Whether he's a superstar or just a star to young people is something that can be debated. And I don't pick first or second year players because, we're all intrigued by rookies and we're all, yes, I'm intrigued by Victor Wembanyama. I would watch every second of Victor Wembanyama basically doing anything in life. I'd watch him drive a car. I'd watch him go to the grocery store. I'd watch him pump gas. I'm all in. So I have I've picked 5 so far, but I will give you the floor. Give me one of yours to start with, and we'll just fly through these.
All right, my first, and I was trying to go with players who, I don't think have been discussed a lot necessarily this offseason as intriguing players. And to stick with the Grizzlies theme, Jaren Jackson Jr., because he went from an all-star 2 years ago, defensive player of the year, to, his per game averages looked pretty good last season, but from an advanced stats perspective, a tremendously disappointing season. And offensively, I can buy giving him a pass for everything else that was going on. His usage rate ballooned from around 25% to a career high 30%. His assist rate on twos, like the percentage of those that was assisted, went way down, which is, indicative of more self-created shots, more difficult attempts. I do wonder about the 3-point shooting. He hit 35.5% in 2022-23, which is, right around league average. Starting to feel kind of like the outlier after we thought that this guy was, going to be an Al Horford type coming into the league. He shot 32% from three, 2 of the last 3 seasons, including last year. And that seems to be closer to, his typical mark. But the real thing is, Jaren Jackson Jr. went from the best rim protector in the league, number one in terms of opponent shooting inside of 5 feet, is a primary defender using the second spectrum tracking on NBA advanced stats. Last year, he was 17th. The 56% that opponents shot on those attempts was the highest of his entire career in a full season. And, is that just the malaise of the Grizzlies being in the lottery, just the rotating door of players who are alongside him in the front court, or is it indicative of potential? I mean, is it actually a concern going into this season? That's what I'm really curious about.
Give me the Jaren Jackson Jr. stock. I'm taking it all. He's bouncing back. And bizarrely, the decline in shooting percentages that you cite, coupled with the increase in usage rate, has me optimistic for his offensive play this year. I think both him and Desmond Bane were forced to stretch their offensive games pretty much beyond the breaking point without Ja Morant, and managed okay, all things considered. And now they have the number one creator on the team back. And I think we'll get a more comfortable shot diet for themselves. Jaren Jackson Jr., like, not only did people think he was going to be Al Horford, they thought he was going to be able to shoot off the dribble threes, coming off pin down threes, be like one of the most like almost like Towns-ish in his 3-point shooting, which hasn't panned out. I'm betting on a big season for him. I'm betting on malaise and horrible Team USA hangover as part of the reason for his decline in defense last year. I'm optimistic about Jaren Jackson Jr.
Which is
Give
funny
me
because
another one.
I picked both. I guess we can make this the transition. Picked both USA basketball centers from the World Cup roster, because Walker Kessler also had a bit of a malaise in year two, and some commonalities in that, I think, in terms of, he went from playing with Mike Conley Jr. as his starting point guard most of his rookie season to, all of a sudden it's Keontae George is a rookie, is the primary playmaker. His assisted rate on twos, intriguingly, actually went up rather than down. But, his shooting percent, then John Collins comes in as a starter alongside him at the start of the season. Another guy who, is a role man, above the rim finisher, playing in kind of the same space that Walker Kessler likes to operate. So Kessler shot 61% as a starter. He shot 68% as a reserve, playing less frequently with Collins, as they kind of staggered those two guys. And the difference here is, I mentioned the drop off in Jaren Jackson as a rim protector. I think people perceived that happening with Kessler, and it didn't. Like,
no, was he number one in field goal percentage against the rim? If he wasn't number one, he was top three.
He was not. He was in fact number 3. Ivica Zubac, recently extended by the Clippers, was number 1 in this category.
By the way, that's it. Just, you brought up Zoo. That's a great deal for the Clippers, and I'm happy for Zoo. I mean, that guy, again, we don't have to. If we should repeat it every time that the Lakers traded him for Mike Muscala. I mean, that's how marginal he was and how much time he spent in the G League. He has made himself one hell of a reliable starting center on both ends of the floor.
Farewell to Mike Muscala also while we're on this note. But yeah, he was just ahead of Rudy Gobert in terms of opponent shooting at the rim. He was just as dominant in that regard. His rebounding wasn't maybe quite as strong, and I get why that's a concern for the Jazz, but it feels like this guy is still too good to be stuck in like a 20 minute a night off the bench role. And whether it's, him just becoming the starter in Utah if they trade Collins, or if it's Utah potentially looking to trade Kessler, I expect him to bounce back, and at least in terms of perception this season.
Yeah, he was a popular buy low candidate for teams that need a center. I think our former colleague Ian Begley reported that the Knicks kind of kicked the tires on him. That makes a lot of sense. He is on my long list, but will not end up making my column, only because I'm very confident he is going to bounce back. He couldn't bounce lower than he did last year and then playing Summer League. I think the question for him is, what is his feel level on offense? How much can he sort of, he's pretty good in the short roll and all that, but can he have a little bit more development in terms of his feel and his moving on the ball, moving the ball on offense? But he's on my list. Okay, I'm going to let you pick one more before I pick more exciting players. My players are more exciting than yours.
All right. Well, Jaren Jackson Jr. is an all-star. I guess he's not.
And also in the year he won Defensive Player of the Year. he would block shots like just a phantom coming out of like a horror movie villain. He was like, what? Wait, Jaren Jackson Jr. was over there, and then he came and blocked this poor guy's shot at the rim and damn near blocked it through the backboard. He was very terrifying to watch. Pick somebody else.
He blocked so many shots at home that we had a whole Reddit thread about whether they were padding his stats.
Oh my God, I forgot about that.
My last two are actually more obscure, so I'll give you my last remaining big name, which is Tyler Herro.
Interesting. I'm glad you're bringing. I don't have any Heatles on my list, but I'm glad you're bringing up the Heat because they are facing a potentially fraught season on a lot of different levels.
Yeah, I mean they're a team that, I think people kind of didn't talk about them a lot in free agency because they weren't doing stuff, and other than Caleb Martin, their players weren't leaving. It was mostly status quo, but status quo has not been very good in the regular season the last couple of years, and there wasn't the playoff run along with it last year. And obviously, that playoff run in 2023 came with Tyler Herro not playing. Last year's playoff run was interesting. He did have 24 points and 14 assists as they beat the Celtics in Boston in Game 2. If you look at the other 4 games combined,
after which, by the way, Jimmy Butler basically said like we're about to go up 2-0, and then they were essentially never heard from again.
He had 13 total assists in the other 4 games of the series and averaged 15 points per game in them. So not a strong playoffs. I think one of the questions you've asked, I believe on the podcast, is like, why is Terry Rozier here? And I think the reason is because Tyler Herro hasn't necessarily developed as a scorer the way that he were expecting. His usage rate has gone down since he's been starting after winning the 6-man award 2 years ago, but his efficiency hasn't improved like you'd hope in that role. It's actually gone backwards relative to league average because it's just basically stayed the same. Did average a career high 4.8 assists per 36 minutes last season, so some playmaking improvement. And also just he's never played more than 67 games in a season. Like some of that on the front end was shortened seasons due to COVID, but the last few years has not been able to stay healthy on a consistent basis. And this is someone who's gone from, you look at after that bubble run to the finals, people are thinking of him as a future all-star, maybe the next guy in the sort of this Heat run of, alongside Bam Adebayo is another guy who was drafted in the late lottery who's going to carry them forward in the next year. Part of the reason the Jimmy Butler situation is so fraught is if it's not Jimmy Butler as the Heat's best player, then who? Because it doesn't look like Herro is going to get to that point in his career.
Well, the answer, of course, is Bam, who's just a winner, and they signed him to an extension that he richly deserves. I'm glad you brought up Tyler Herro. I think it was 2 summers ago I wrote just a deep dive on Tyler Herro when it was very clear he was going to have to be the centerpiece player in any Miami trade for whether it was Donovan Mitchell or ultimately Damian Lillard, and they didn't end up getting any of these guys. And by the way, I liked the Rozier trade for them. I don't think it was me that said why is Terry Rozier here. Maybe at some point I said that, but I liked that trade for them. And I comped Herro in that column to CJ McCollum as sort of a scoring combo guard who was always going to be a little bit of a liability on defense, was never going to get you as many rim shots and free throws as you would hope, but was and maybe never would make an all-star team, but would be a damn good player for a long time in the NBA. And I think he can still get to that point, but something in this brew has just not worked yet. And I don't know that has much to do with Tyler Herro other than his health. But like I was talking to someone about the Heat yesterday. I think they're like, if you ask me how many guys are just guaranteed starting spots right now, it might just be 2. It might just be Jimmy and Bam, because I don't know what combination of Rozier, Herro, Jovic was a starter last year, and I think he's going to be a nice player for them. Jaquez might be ready to start. You might start Haywood Highsmith just to put like a low usage defense first player in there somewhere. I don't know who is going to end up in that starting 5. The bench, like, again, you're one injury away from it being rickety. I mean, a couple of those guys we mentioned just now will be in the bench rotation. Is Josh Richardson going to be healthy? If so, when? Duncan Robinson's still around. Highsmith, they need a lot out of now. He kind of seemed like a sometimes break in case of emergency guy, sometimes more than that. Kevin Love, backup center again. Like they have like the names are all good and the parts mesh in some ways, but it and we all know Jimmy did not get an extension, and that could be I still expect some resolution there, not if not in the form of an extension, then maybe in a reasonable contract after the season. But you just don't know.
I mean, I think the other interesting thing with Hero is just kind of this concept of how contracts change the way that we view players. And it's so easy when a guy is on a rookie deal, particularly, if they're mid first round pick like Hero was, to get very excited about their potential. And then when sort of the reality comes of paying them market value, suddenly it changes how we start to think about them. I think it's been fascinating to see that shift with Jonathan Kuminga this summer before he even signs an extension, where, in look, this guy is so young. Look what he's produced when he's given an opportunity. And now that this extension is looming for the Warriors, all of a sudden people are treating him as if like he's got no value to the Jazz in the Lowry market and discussions.
Well, I'm a Kuminga fan. And yeah, and on the flip side, like Pajemski is the most valuable trade chip the Warriors have. And he, people talk about him in Golden State like he may be an all-star someday. Maybe he will be. But part of the reason he has so much value is he has 3 years left on his rookie deal. And Brandon Ingram is like a 5 years down the line version of what Kuminga's trade value is going through now in terms of just, good player, 25, 5 and 5. I got to pay him how much for how many years? Is Brandon Ingram the second best player on a great team? If the answer is maybe closer to the third best player on a great team, then you can't pay that guy $50 million a year. It just doesn't, the house of cards collapses. Speaking of Brandon Ingram, I'll give you one of mine. Trey Murphy III in New Orleans, 15 points a game last year, 38% shooting, 72% of his shots were threes. And the reason I have him as intriguing is, look, he's awesome to watch as a basketball player. I'm interested, and I think he's going to. I said all last year, Trey Murphy III has to start for the Pelicans in 2024 or 25. It has to. That's going to be over. I would suspect, short of a trade, which still has not happened, they're starting 5. Just like if he's got to start and Herb's got to start and Ingram and Zion have to start because they're Ingram and Zion, and DeJounte Murray has to start because DeJounte Murray. Well, there's your 5 guys right there. You're starting with Zion at center and you're going to figure it out. And that's kind of a switchy, funky lineup defensively that could be interesting. But why Trey Murphy is really interesting to me is if Brandon Ingram is traded, what does Trey Murphy III scaling up on offense look like? Because those 15 points right now are coming on threes, on closeouts, like driving against closeouts, pump and go. He's got an incredible pump. People treat him, and I think he's earned it, almost like a Klay Thompson level shooter, and how close people play him. And he's very smart at leveraging that sort of pressurized defense for driving opportunities. And then in transition, if you actually look up, Kevin Pelton, who the most efficient pick and roll ball handler in the league was last year in terms of points produced out of their pick and rolls, minimum 100 picks, it's Trey Murphy III. Almost 1.4 points directly out of each pick and roll, but only 4 pick and rolls per 100 possessions. So I don't know what him scaling up is. Maybe it's using him as a screener more, and he's a great movement shooter. He can set ball screens, so you hide a small guy on him. He screens for Zion, he screens for Ingram, whatever it is. But and defensively, he's got to reach another level too. He's got to get a little more stable on defense. But it's more the how far can this scale up? Because this guy's already a really, really good role player, a really high level role player. He's extensionable, eligible. If he gets extended, it's going to be for a lot, and deservedly so. I just am curious to see what's next in the offensive development.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's a couple of forwards who got traded together from Phoenix to Brooklyn who are kind of interesting comparisons for him. Because Mikal Bridges is someone who, he leaned more heavily on the D side of the 3 and D equation than Trey Murphy, but was able to grow past that role into someone who, to some degree or another, was able to be a go-to scorer for the Nets the last couple of seasons. And then, now has all the more value when you put him back in a secondary role or a tertiary role in New York. Or is it more like Cam Johnson, who very great role filler, great shooter, capable defender across multiple positions, but didn't prove to have a lot more juice even when put in a situation where he more offense was potentially needed from him in Brooklyn.
Yeah, and Trey Murphy, I think, is a little bit more explosive of an athlete than Cam Johnson. He's got a good first step and a better second step when he gets some momentum. He doesn't, like, one-on-one. he is not someone who's going to roast bigger guys on switches. He will shoot over point guards on switches off the dribble, which is very encouraging. But if you get him if one person runs a pick and roll and gets him the ball, and his defender even has to take a half step to close out on him, he's really good at like a little pump fake, get you up in the air and go. And once he gets a runway, he's really explosive and really good at getting to the rim. His passing in that exact situation with sort of the floor in motion, the defense rotating, has to reach another level, and that's comes with experience and time. I'm really optimistic about him. I'm just curious to see what it looks like. Maybe it's just more of everything, more shooting, more roving around, more. He's a very smart mover off the ball. I love Trey Murphy III. I'm intrigued by him. I'm going to give you another one that's going to be near and dear to your Pacific Northwest heart.
Okay.
Shaedon Sharpe. Missed most of last season due to injury. Was handed a much larger role last season when he did play for a tanktastic Blazers team. He ran 8 picks per 100 possessions, 8 pick and rolls per 100 possessions as a rookie. That shot up to almost 22 last year. His efficiency on those was awful, largely due to turnovers and missed jump shots, both missed twos and missed threes. I was watching a lot of film on him today, and I came away from it even more optimistic about his development as some kind of elite offensive weapon down the line. One of the reasons is he shot 25% on pull-up threes as a rookie, 29% last year. Catch and shoot threes, 39% last year, 46% as a rookie. Like, I think the jump shot is going to be there, starting with the catch and shoot numbers and trickling down. The second thing is, like, he's not an unwilling passer, and he's got some craft and feel to his game when he gets the ball, catches the ball, goes around the screen, and has sort of his defender on his hip. He will hold the ball a little too long sometimes and miss passes, but that's, I think, more of a experience thing and less of a I'm hunting my own points all the time thing. Like, he's willing to get off the ball, and I think there's some interesting next steps for him. But of all the young guys on the Blazers, Scoot's going to get a ton of attention because he was the number 2 pick in the draft. I'm not sure. If you had asked me to predict the Blazers starting 5 right now, I don't think Scoot is in it this year. And I think that's totally fine. I would go Simons, Sharpe, Denny Avdia, who they traded a lot for, including Bob Carrington, Jeremy Grant, until he's traded at some point, and DeAndre Ayton. And that's fine. I think Sharpe is going to be a really good complementary offensive player. And again, I'm interested in what the scaling up of his responsibilities looks like.
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, I'm interested in what the scaling down looks like, because so much of his season last year was, Scoot was hurt for a period at the start of the season. Anthony Simons was out for a longer period. And that's when they started putting the ball in his hands a lot, sort of out of necessity, as they had done in the final month of his rookie season. And we saw, him really start to pop off. And, through 9 games or so, that was going really well. He was shooting 38% from 3, 44 from the field. Scoring was like 18 a game. And then the question that I'm curious about is, like, how much of the drop off in efficiency that we saw after that was about he was playing through this core muscle injury before he had the surgery that ended his season. And, that was really impacting him, as opposed to just kind of this being his natural level. The fascinating thing about Shaedon as a rookie, when I saw him a lot more, both because he played a full season and because I was in Portland more often, is he's such an incredible athlete, and yet he doesn't do the things that we associate with athleticism in terms of accumulating rebounds, steals, and blocks. And that started to get a little better in the second half of his rookie season. They ticked up again, overall in year 2. I do want to see him continue translating that athleticism into defensive playmaking in a way that, we still haven't quite gotten to.
Well, that's a long project. Shaedon Sharpe becoming an average or better wing defender is going to take a long time, particularly off the ball. He's really struggled. And the sort of question built in to the Blazers is there any universe where Henderson, Simons, and Sharpe all play together for extended minutes and the team doesn't just hemorrhage points defensively? And I'm not optimistic about that. In fact, I think Simons is one of the more intriguing trade candidates right now in the league. And if I'm the Blazers, I'm just kind of sitting there. Like, I like Anthony Simons, good contract. I think he's extension eligible again pretty soon. Good player, can really shoot it. Um, I'm waiting for someone to bowl me over with a trade offer that makes me say go. But on Sharpe, that the defense is going to take a long time. The one thing he's already really good at is anything that involves him coming off a screen on offense. He's very good at that. Catch, shoot, catch, drive, back cut along the baseline, like fake going around a screen and then come on the baseline back cut. He's already pretty good at that. He needs to get better at passing out of those situations. That's experience. And you're right. Maybe he'll never be a heavy on ball option, but you can find clips of like, I think he's 6'7", Shaedon Sharpe. He's pretty big. And there were a couple of clips I was watching where he like runs a pick and roll with Scoot Henderson and Tim Hardaway Jr. switches onto him. And without stopping, without hesitating, he just dribbles into Tim Hardaway Jr., spins off of him, and lays the ball in this sort of like bully ball driving mode, just using his size against smaller players. That is really intriguing. And I just think the shooting numbers are encouraging. The athleticism, like once he gets going to the rim, he's got nice touch left-handed. He's got a good in and out dribble with both hands. I feel very confident that Shaedon Sharpe is going to be a very good player, at least on offense for the Blazers.
You know, I think it's interesting you connect those two things. You mentioned him being so good at coming off of screens. Like, that's the sort of thing that you drill a lot in practice. And Shaedon Sharpe just hasn't played that much 5-on-5 basketball at a high level because he didn't play that season at Kentucky. Now he's had this largely lost second season. So I think you can sort of categorize things into like, what can you simulate in practice and what do you have to have the 5-on-5 experience for? And sometimes I think in terms of the role of minutes in player development, like we can undersell what you can drill part of it. Like if it was so important, Joel Embiid wouldn't be as amazing as he is after, not playing the first 2 seasons of his career, like 30 games, the first 3 seasons combined. He was able to develop a lot of what he does in practice, but it took a while for some of those field things to come for him. And those are still developing. He's still making process as a passer last season. I think that's the development curve for Shaedon as well.
All right, just rapid fire. Give me the rest of your names. I told you to pick 5. We've gotten to 2 or 3 at this point. Just hit me with a couple more.
All right, so the other two, Keon Ellis, I think is one of the most interesting.
He's on my long list. He might make my column.
They just need him. Like without Harrison Barnes, because if he's in San Antonio, as we talked about earlier, they are in desperate need of guys who can both space the floor and defend alongside DeMar DeRozan and De'Aaron Fox in the backcourt. And Keon Ellis was that guy for them last season. He's bigger than you think. He's also 6'6", like Sharpe is listed at. Shot 42% on threes last year. And while I wanted to be skeptical of that, even though he was someone I was pretty high on coming out of Alabama, shot 41% the season before in the G League. Like everything indicates to me, like this guy's a really good role player. And the name that I would like very optimistically use for Keon Ellis is, can he become Kentavious Caldwell-Pope?
So he's on my list for all the reasons you just said. The Kings coaches love Keon Ellis and are very optimistic about him. I think he might be the favorite to be a starter this year to kind of win that 5th starting spot, and deservedly so. I mentioned Trey Murphy's pick and roll numbers. Keon Ellis's pick and roll numbers on higher volume, still not high for a guy his size, but in terms of something distinct from KCP, who's not really a pick and roll guy, were outstanding last season. And that may not be a skill you lean into too much on a team with Fox and Sabonis running the offense, but it's
and DeRozan and Malik Monk
and DeMar DeRozan. But there are a lot of indications that this is a more skilled offensive player than people think. Keegan Murray is another name in Sacramento that's an obvious fit for this kind of combo. All right, give me your last one.
My last one is Dyson Daniels, because I think the idealized version of Dyson Daniels is a really good fit in Atlanta next to Trae Young. Give them size in the backcourt. He's terrific defending on the ball if he can shoot. And, that's the big question mark. Didn't really make any progress. Was still at 31% last season. He's been working with, maybe the best at this point shot doctor in the league, and Fred Vinson with the Pelicans coaching staff. The fact that they weren't convinced he could become a shooter is maybe a little bit of a concern for me. And I think it's interesting because guys who get traded on their rookie contracts is value, like not, buy low trade, but he was hypothetically, along with the pick they got, part of the value in return for DeJounte Murray. I don't feel like the track record of those guys is that good. Aaron Nesmith is someone you could say succeeded in this in Indiana. Nikhil Alexander Walker, like eventually it took a while, but like the last guy who got traded before the last year of his rookie contract, who really hit big on his next team, I think is Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, who, obviously that's pie in the sky. We're not talking about that with Dyson Daniels. Whereas like you can look at like RJ Hampton when he was in the Aaron Gordon trade, Romeo Langford, part of the Derek White trade, Cam Reddish, going for a first round pick, Dennis Smith Jr., Landry Shamet. Like they don't usually turn out that well. Like when the other team is trading you early in your career, it's probably because they know something that the rest of the league doesn't. So I'm curious to see how that's going to play out with Dyson Daniels.
Well, it's only one thing, and it's the shooting. Everything else is going to be there. And I mentioned the Pelicans playing smaller and all that. They lost a ton of rebounding in the offseason between Valanciunas. I mean, their only veteran center on the team right now is Daniel Tice, who's undersized as a 5 as it is. And Dyson Daniels is a really good rebounding guard too. So that'll be interesting for the Pelicans. I like Dyson Daniels. Atlanta, I'm glad you mentioned them. I wrote a little bit about them a couple months ago, and they have some veterans, they have some young guys. That feels like, and they clearly made a decision in trading DeJounte Murray and not trading Trae Young. I'm not convinced that that's the final decision that they're going to make with that backcourt, and how they play could be a huge factor in where they go with Trae Young going forward. Okay, I'll just read you my list of other guys, other candidates. I think Emmanuel quickly will probably make my column just because the Raptors bet really big on him being, if not a franchise level point guard, then something close to whatever that player looks like next to Scotty Barnes. Kuminga's obvious. Tari Eason I have. Jaden McDaniels I feel like is an interesting one. And then I'm going to pair these guys as one player for purposes of the column. Two super athletic lob catching young centers on moribund Eastern Conference franchises. Jalen Duren, who I've been mostly quite high on, and Mark Williams, who's played 62 games in 2 years for Charlotte, only 19 last year with back issues. They're optimistic he's going to be healthy. If not, that he's going to be healthy, period. I think he's shown flashes of being a really interesting player for a team that needs somebody with that skill set and just is completely under the radar because he's barely played, and when he's played for a bad team. And like I was almost tempted to put LaMelo Ball in again this year because he barely played last year. But I think that's an interesting team in Charlotte that could punch a little bit above its weight. And if things go really right for them, like win more games than they really would like to, and then they can take steps to ensure that they don't win so many games. But they've got some interesting pieces there. But I think everyone's excited about Duren. Just the level of athleticism is crazy. The intel on him as a guy is through the roof good. He's still only 20 years old, so he's very young, still learning the nuances of defense, kind of probably behind for given his minutes, but he's played for this just crazy franchise that has to decide kind of which young players it really values as part of its core and which it doesn't, but they don't have anyone like him. And Mark Williams just hasn't played, but I'm super intrigued by what he can bring to Charlotte.
Yeah, Mark Williams sort of gets overlooked because all the attention is on LaMelo Ball. The time that he's missed the last 2 seasons, you don't think about the fact that Mark Williams didn't play, after what, mid-December was it even that he made it to last year? And I think about him in the context of the guy who followed him a couple years later at Duke, Derek Lively II, and he got thrust into this just picture perfect role in Dallas as a lob finisher from Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, but also the defensive versatility we saw from Lively to be able to switch out and make plays on guards. I think Williams has some of that same ability to do that. Duren, to me, what's interesting is like there is this archetype of the rim running, rim protecting center. Can he grow beyond that with his skill as a playmaker, the skill to create his own offense, and then just will his rim protection match kind of the potential he has at that end?
The bigger question to me is his defense. That's the pivot point for him as a player, because if he doesn't become a good defensive player, I don't think he's ever going to be good enough offensively to really play a role on a great team, even though we all know he can just jump out of the building and catch lobs. And to your point, I've highlighted this in 10 things before. He has more feel on offense than people, I think, who don't watch the Pistons might expect, given his archetype as a player. He can face up, he can work off the bounce. He's a pretty good passer for a 20-year-old center. But as always, the question is going to be like, how much of that is he going to do on a team that has Cade Cunningham, who I remain pretty high on. We'll see how long Ivy is there, but other guys who are going to kind of control the ball, how much of that are you going to really lean into? So I think defense is the make or break. For me, you mentioned Dallas. We might as well talk about the Mavs. I'm not going to. I didn't hear the hoop. Where did the Hoop Collective guys have them in terms of like contender tiers?
Did they just do the East?
They just did the East. Okay,
I think they just did the East.
You talk to people, and yeah, they're in that sort of penciled in top 4 in the West. I don't hear an enormous amount of faith around the league that they could make a repeat run like they did last season. Some of that is digesting the changes that they made. Out went Josh Green and Derrick Jones Jr., and in came Quentin Grimes and Najee Marshall and Klay Thompson. And well, does Klay Thompson have to start because he's Klay Thompson? If so, what does that mean for your defense? Or do we have to do this thing where we play this way for 40 games? And it's like, all right, maybe now Najee Marshall has to start. I'm pretty optimistic about the Mavs. First and foremost, Luka is Luka. And still there's lingering, like, is Kyrie going to be on the floor for an entire season again with no dust ups or anything like that? I'm going to assume yes. Why not? He seems happy in Dallas. He was awesome last year. They made the finals. Another year of PJ Washington makes me optimistic, and just Lively with a year under his belt makes me very optimistic. I think that dude's going to be really good. In fact, I think he's going to supplant. If I had to bet, I think he supplants Gafford as the starting center. And their depth is just okay. That's the case for most teams. Is if I like their mix of players, and I don't think what happened in the playoffs was like fool's gold. I think that's a real, now making the finals is a different story, but I think that's a real legit good team.
I considered Najee Marshall for my list. I just think Dallas ultimately has enough other options as wing defenders that he's not like as make or break as Keon Ellis is to Sacramento, but he's a bigger, better option than, the Quentin Grimeses and Dante Exums of the world. So I think it is important for them, that he becomes that type of player. You could also say PJ Washington Jr., like his playoff run was so, terrific offensively compared to even what we saw in the couple of months in Dallas after the trade, that I think he's, if they're going to sustain what they did in the playoffs, I think PJ Washington Jr. might be the biggest key to that.
It's going to be a fun season. We got what, 6 more weeks before the games start. We got a lot to talk about, a lot of preview content coming, a lot of intriguing players, a lot of intriguing teams. Kevin Pelton, anything we need to be on the lookout for you?
Not the rest of this week, but next week scheduled to ride on the Houston Rockets and my intrigue around them and kind of the way they're building their team.
Ooh, can you spoil any? We all know they have a whole bunch of interesting young players, and Fred VanVleet in the last year of his contract, and 2 guys who are up for extensions. And I was doing their rotation yesterday. I was like, can Cam Whitmore even get minutes on this team? How much are they going to force feed Reed Shepherd right off the bat? Can you spoil any of it?
Yeah, I haven't written it, so I guess it's all spoiled at this point. But you mentioned Tari Eason potentially on your most intriguing list. Like, I think he's someone who's been a little bit forgotten about because he missed so much time at the end of last season, but has really popped statistically when he's been on the court. And one of the things I mentioned the last time I was on was, they seem now to a degree like the model. Like, hey, we're going to get this young talent, then we're going to import some free agents and allow them to develop. And that's what Detroit would do with the addition of Tobias Harris, and then the guys that they got via trade, Tim Hardaway Jr., etc., Malik Beasley. I think there's other teams that are kind of thinking this way, or even Orlando, you could say, although they were farther ahead in the process, adding KCP, but they have some interesting decisions coming up because now Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün are headed into rookie extension talks, and as compared to the teams that have just gone ahead and extended there are players who are kind of in that range, whether it's, Evan Mobley or Franz Wagner or even Cade Cunningham to a degree. The Rockets thus far seem to be playing a higher degree of hardball with Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün. And it's going to be interesting to see, does that result in them hitting restricted free agency next summer, or do they consider trading them before that? So I think a lot of interesting decisions ahead for Houston.
Yeah, I mean, there's been this sort of counter, this not backlash, but whatever, to Franz Wagner and Scotty Barnes and Cade Cunningham and Evan Mobley all just getting, here's the max, take the max, here it is. And you hear a lot of front office people being like, dude, have we forgotten what the point of restricted free agency is? The point is it's a hammer and we have the leverage. And on top of that, there's not going to be much cap space in free agency as things stand now, at least maybe 2 teams. Bobby Marks did the whole projections. It's not going to be very much that have like real legit, we can go big game hunting cap space. Houston, by the way, could be one depending on any number of things. I would find it unlikely given Jalen Green and Şengün, but and that could also impact, like you mentioned, Denver with Jamal Murray or New Orleans with Brandon Ingram. Like maybe you feel a little more emboldened letting those guys into unrestricted free agency because where is the giant offer coming from? But the giant offer always seems to come. DeMar DeRozan keeps getting giant amounts of money even without cap space teams that appear interested in him. Anyway, look out for Kevin's piece on the Rockets next week. They are indeed a very interesting franchise to watch. KP, as always, much appreciated. We'll talk soon.
Thanks for having me.